So in this video I'll be presenting the group game project I completed for game programming. For this project, my partner and we made an infinite runner using the Love2D game engine. So to the start of the game, we get the screen here. It has a blinking start label and then a character, as well as a timer. And then when we start the game, the label sort of drops off and we get into the gameplay. So gameplay pretty much consists of jumping and trying to get the best time possible by avoiding these enemies. When we collide into the enemies, the game will end and sort of reset. And there's these blocks that are sort of randomly placed that the players can jump on. So one of the main features that we worked on in this game is the animation system. We pretty much did everything from scratch. Love2D pretty much gives you a game loop and an image library out of the box. So we ended up doing a lot of the things like animations and collisions manually. We did this because we didn't want to include extra libraries that other people made into the project because we weren't going to use everything in them, and we felt like it would just increase the complexity of it too much. So one other thing is when the game resets, the birds fly away, and we ended up implementing all of this type of stuff so that we could give this seamless type of look to our game. Because there isn't really much in the way of gameplay, we wanted it to at least appear polished, and so in order to do that, we sort of have this, the birds sort of fly away, and we have this start screen that sort of falls down, and we don't have any sort of scene transitions anywhere. It's all the same scene the entire time, and we felt that for an infinite runner, we felt that this would be the best approach to sort of make it look polished. As far as the background, we randomly spawn clouds, and there's sort of like 10 different types that we spawn, and we vary the speeds to give the illusion of depth in the background, and we feel that it provided a pretty nice effect. So that's the gameplay. So taking a look at the code, this game was written in Love2D, and what that pretty much means is we put a lot of the logic in this in a file called main.lua. That's sort of the starting point for the game engine, and we have to override a couple methods for everything to work. So that includes a draw method, an update method, and a load method. So load is called before the game loop starts, and then update is called each tick in the game loop, and then draw is called after update every tick. And that pretty much is sort of how everything's organized. We sort of built it around this sort of game loop. So the animation system, we can sort of it starts in the load method, and we sort of just fill a bunch of arrays of sprites with the different frames for each thing that we want to animate. And then in update, we sort of we spawn objects that will different types of objects. So we spawn clouds here, birds, and then blocks, and then we move everything as well. And then in draw, in order to give the appearance of animation, we keep track of the current index, which is basically the current frame of the objects, of each object, and we then increment it to the next frame, and then use modulo to go back to the starting frame. And for this game, the only sort of tree of different animations that can occur is in player, and that is sort of just dependent on whether or not it's jumping. So yeah, so if the player is jumping, we use the jumping animations, but if it's not, then we just go with the running animation. And then if it's the start screen, we have the sort of player like sitting down idle sprite. in terms of collisions, because all of the frames, all of the sprites are the same size, we could just use pretty much just just checking the points to see if they're within a certain range. So that's not too bad. What ended up being a lot of work, though, was making sure that all the frames for each sprite are the same size, because that would allow when you take a sprite sheet, it's sort of just a bunch of images, and you have to cut them up in GIMP, and so that ended up being pretty time consuming. So that was the design of the main file. We do have a couple classes. We have a player class and a block class, actually, yeah, it's just a player class and a block class. And so basically we wanted to just abstract some of the logic away when we're sort of like manipulating the player, or like we're doing key input or whatever it is. So for the player, we defined a sort of key handler thing that takes in a key and has an event, and we initialize it in the main. So for example here, we initialize the key event for space to the key space to an event for space, which ends up being the function that we use for jumping. And in block, because it is just a block, we just put a simple like move function that that can then be called an update to sort of move the block. Lua classes ended up being a bit weird. You have to take in this like parameter and set it to like a meta table. So that ended up being a bit confusing. It's really a syntactic thing, but just sort of debugging when you don't have this ends up being pretty tricky, because each object, if you don't do this, would end up sharing the same reference, and so it ends up just not working the way you think it would. So jumping is a sort of part of the physics that we had to implement on our own. In order to implement jumping, we pretty much have this this quadratic equation that gives us a y in respect to time, and the effect of doing it this way is that we get a jump that sort of accelerates and then slows down towards the top and then accelerates back down, where if we did it linearly, we just did a linear transformation up and then down, it would end up not looking that realistic. It would not be like someone would expect it to be. And jumping with collisions ends up being a bit tricky as well, because the player, or rather the boxes, we wanted it so that when the player jumps up, it's not gonna hit, it can jump through the box, and we did that because our boxes are randomly generated. So if I go back to our game and I jump up, I'll jump through the box. And yeah, so we did that because if we didn't, there would be a lot of cases where you wouldn't be able to sort of proceed, or you would try to jump to dodge and you would just hit the box, and then it also screws up the sort of jumping code, because we don't really have like the jump assumes that it's going to hit a certain height, and we don't really implement code that would allow it to sort of fall down realistically. So we sort of just avoided that, but the end result is that our collision code for boxes is a little weird, and that it only affects it when you're jumping on top, or rather, it only triggers when you're falling on top of the box and not any other way. So that's pretty much the design of our program and the game that we made. There are several things that we want to implement that we haven't yet, and one of those, the main thing being sound. We really tried to look for good quality, like free audio, but we weren't able to really get stuff that worked with our like world and was really just good enough. So that's one thing we want to try to do in the future. The other thing is we want to vary the levels. So right now we only have like one sprite for blocks and a couple sprites for clouds, and one type of enemy. We really want to try to get multiple different types and sort of like vary their movements, so the game's a bit more interesting as time progresses. But yeah, that's the game that we made for our group project.
This is the group final project. We did a paintball assassin style game. We used Northeastern's campus as a map. We thought that would be interesting. So this is our main menu over here. It's just Find Masters and Options menu for master volume and sound effects that you can change things for, and this quit button will quit the app, but we don't want to do that right now. So we go here and we can create a lobby over here and then join the game in this one. Check our color. I'll just leave this as player 2 and we get into the game. So, now we can see that, back to the game, I just need to find this other player now, maybe they're over here. So what ends up happening is, you have a target player that you can see in the top right. So this player's target is the blue character. So we just eliminate them. You can see in the other screen that they respawned to another place. So that you keep your same target, and now they're over here, and we just find them. So we wanted to make the school campus as our map, just because it seemed like an interesting idea, especially if we were going to have people from Northeastern testing the game for us. It meant that the map wasn't going to have to, or they wouldn't have to get used to the map, they would already know everything. So this is Baracus, and I'm sorry about the footsteps, we're just moving really quickly. Oh, now we're floating. Oh, that's actually a good idea. I could just jump and avoid the footsteps altogether. This is the West Village quad. We don't have things like trees, though, implemented. So that's the game. It's whoever is the first player to get to 3 is the winner. So that's how it works.